1898 to the present.
In order to create the central bank, certain obstacles had to be overcome. First, those opposed to a central bank would need to be removed, and secondly, the law would need to be changed, or simply appear to be changed. To deal with the troublesome individuals who opposed a central bank, the Jesuits spared no expense. They built a ship of death called the Titanic.
The sinking of the Titanic was the design of the Jesuit order to get rid of the opposition to the creation of a central bank in the United States.
And the men on the Titanic were opposed to a central bank. They had to die. Among those were John Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and a host of other millionaires who were opposed to a central bank in America. Therefore, they had to be taken out of the way. And they were on the Titanic.
The company building the ship was owned by J.P. Morgan, who was himself an agent of the Rothschilds family, the Rothschilds being the bankers for the Pope and the Vatican. The main Jesuit targets were brought on board. The captain of the ship was Edward John Smith. It appears from his actions that Captain Smith was a Jesuit coadjutor, that is, a Jesuit who has taken the oath but does not wear the robes. A coadjutor blends into the scenery and never looks like a Jesuit priest. It is a veteran sea captain, Edward Smith, who orders the ship to travel through an 80-square-mile ice field at full speed on a moonless night. There had been over 8 telegrams warning the captain of the danger.
He's warned 8 times, slow the ship down, slow the Titanic down, you're going too fast. Not once stopped. Knew there was an iceberg field up ahead, knew that he should have slowed down, but didn't. And so you look and you say, how was it that this man could go headlong into a field of icebergs and not slow the ship down, not be more careful? The only conclusion you can draw is, as a coadjutor of the Jesuit order, right through the line, the chain of command, he was told, sink the ship. And he did. On board the Titanic, and this is all documented in a National Geographic video that was put out in 1986. You can go to your local library and they'll either have it on hand or they can get it on library loan. But on that videotape, it shows that as the Titanic was coming up along the coast of England, it had various stops. And at one stop, a Jesuit priest got on board. His name was Francis Brown. Francis Brown got on board the Titanic, took pictures of all of the wealthy people, took pictures of Edward Smith, the captain, and then just before the Titanic set sail across the Atlantic, Francis Brown got off. And then, of course, the Titanic sunk.
Well, Francis Brown is given a camera by his bishop, by his uncle, the bishop, and he is told to go down and take all these pictures of all these people we're going to kill in first class. And so that's what he does. He takes picture of all these rich people, everybody that's there is going to go down, and a rich passenger offers him passage. Well, he knows the ship's going to go down, but he very sheepishly got in contact with his provincial. And the provincial's message was, get off that ship.
Like Brown, another noted passenger, Jesuit agent J.P. Morgan, did not make the ill-fated sea voyage. Even though booked on the ship for passage to America, Morgan also fortuitously canceled at the last minute.
Of course, J.P. Morgan, he had his own suite reserved for him. And there were some 55 men who at the last minute canceled their reservations on the Titanic. J.P. Morgan was one of them. Said he was sick. Oh, by the way, and don't load any of my art treasures on the Titanic either. So he didn't have any of his art treasures on it either. Didn't lose any of that.
How do we know there was foul play involved with the Titanic? When the iceberg was sighted, It was First Officer Murdoch who attempted to port around the deadly object. This was sound enough, but Murdoch also ordered the engines into reverse. Author Wynne Wade asked the obvious question. As long as Murdoch was trying to veer out of the iceberg's way, why had he jammed on the brakes, so to speak, by throwing the engines full speed astern? In point of fact, the 1910 edition of Knight's Modern Seamanship clearly contradicted Murdoch's decision. The instructions are clear. Avoid reversing the engines. Wade sums up the situation by saying, Murdoch had maneuvered in a manner more likely to cause collisions than to prevent them. As with many who investigated the Titanic disaster, author Wynne Wade was at a loss to explain Murdoch's actions in going against the book. But the captain and Murdoch's actions were not the only telltale signs of treachery on the night the Titanic sank.
We see all sorts of anomalies on the Titanic. For example, when it was sinking, the emergency flares were to be red, so that ships in those lanes could see the Titanic was in trouble. Well, someone had taken away the red flares and replaced them with white flares, making it look like we were shooting off flares and having a party. And then the loading of the boats, we know that was a fraud. They didn't allow the lifeboats to be completely loaded. They were only half loaded, some 1/3 loaded, because the targets in the first class could not be allowed to board. And the Jesuits were not only the captain, but his officers, and there had been a strike in England at the time, and the men who were normally the ones who would man the ocean liners, they were replaced by Jesuit coadjutors ready to board because they were all under oath to die for the Black Pope if necessary, and so they did carry out the sinking of the Titanic.
But how is it possible that men will commit suicide as Captain Smith and some of his hand-picked crew obviously did?
We have to understand that these men have died to their own self-will. And so they have completely been emptied of their own personalities, and upon the order of their commander will do exactly what they're told. There's no such thing as a disobedient Jesuit. This serves as a warning to all the other men of power, not only in our country, but in England and Europe. You mess with us, and we're going to do to you what we did to all those people on Titanic, and we're going to thwart the investigation. Because a subsequent investigation of the sinking of Titanic blamed Bruce Ismay, the right-hand man of J.P. Morgan, and Captain Ward of England. They were the scapegoats, when they could have easily blamed the men of power at that time. Saw who canceled their reservations. It was a Warren Commission all over again. 9/11 Commission all over again. It's a whitewash and cover-up, and that cover-up is even more powerful than the murder itself.
After many of the leading opponents to a central bank had been removed, the Jesuits moved to obtain passage of the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act, both in 1913.
So they created the Federal Reserve Bank to finance their crusades. Without the Federal Reserve Bank, there's no war in Iraq.